Yes. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Sarah Sterling. I am the program catalyst for conveners.org, and this is our very last ecosystem call of the year. We do ecosystem calls once a quarter, and these are calls that are open to the entire community, our entire network and ecosystem that we're connected with at conveners.org. And today I'm super, super excited for this type of call and our speakers today, because we're going to have a look behind the curtain and do an Ask Me Anything session around global impact conveners. Thank you. Before I get into who our speakers are going to be today, I wanted to just introduce who we are at conveners.org, our team, and what we do. We are a small and virtual but mighty team with members all over the globe. Actually, I'm currently, well, I live in Guatemala City. I'll be traveling tomorrow to San Francisco. We have Sarah Joy, who's one of our co-founders, who's based in Colorado, Colin, Rena in Canada, Christine's currently, I believe, in California, as well as Ray and Missy's in Utah. Next slide. So a little bit about what we do at conveners.org. We do a variety of different things in terms of both within our membership community and our advisory services. Our membership community is a highly participatory community, virtual community that is focused specifically for purpose-first conveners. So what does that look like? What does that mean? That means any individual or organization that is focused on providing a space for others to connect, interact with one another to create some sort of impact or be a catalyst for impact. So that could look like an impact accelerator that works with social entrepreneurs. That could look like a coaching, mentoring, training type of service. It could be an event organizer like Opportunity Collaboration, Salzburg Global Seminar, SOCAP, School World Forum. These are all actual members that are within our membership community. And we also provide one-on-one services. So this is contracted services with large foundations, universities, corporations to support them in their convening needs. So that could look like a facilitated session, a year-long engagement with different types of groups, writing up, doing research, writing up of white papers, etc. So just upcoming calls for all of you who are on the call today to know about. We have Reflect and Revise, You and Your Key Impact Metrics, which is led by one of our members, Craig Zingerlein of Velocity Growth. And then in November, we have our last member call, a year in review, led by Nicola Brown of Kokoro. So since we are a small group today, we always love to kick off of all of our calls with a community connection. So I'd love to hear from each of you, and I think this will help our speakers as well. What is one thing you're looking forward to about today's call? And maybe Colin, we can also stop screen share for a second here. We have Thad and Sam on, and I can share and go first as sort of an example, but I'm just super excited to hear from both of these speakers. They have really amazing convenings. I was just actually at Opportunity Collaboration, and I think it's going to be really exciting to sort of be able to peek behind the curtain and see what is sort of the special sauce or even like major challenges, lessons learned from each of these convenings. So we'll see what comes out from our conversations today. And I'm going to just popcorn it over to Thad.
Well, this is my first meeting, so I'm just kind of popping in to see what's up and what's going on and dip my toe in the water. So I know what's going on going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Thad. Sam, you want to go next?
Sure. So I am trying to figure out what we should do with our events in the future, and I'm just trying to learn as much as we can about what's going on in the industry and how other people are managing all of this.
Awesome. Dominic, Topher, if you want to share, you're presenting. So what do you want to get out of the call today?
Well, I'm looking forward to learning more about OC because I wasn't able to be part of it and had massive FOMO when it was all going on. So looking forward to hearing more about that and re-engaging with conveners a bit because I haven't been part of one of these calls for a while. So it's nice to be back in the group.
Topher?
What am I looking forward to getting on the call today? Well, I'm always an open book around how OC works. Constantly striving for improvements and tweaks and constructive ways to make it better. So open all the questions and all the feedback. And it's just always fun to be with this group of fellow travelers in this world. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Colin, can you just share screen for one quick second? So we have it for those who weren't able to join physically to the call, virtually to call today. All right. So we like to call our facilitators guest sparks because the role of all facilitators of all of our calls at conveners.org are to spark conversation. So we by no means want Dominic and Topher to be the only ones talking and talking at the rest of you for this call. I have questions I know that I've already written up for both of them. If you have a question, please feel free, since we're a small group as well, raise your hand, unmute, or pop it in the chat, whatever is most comfortable for you and wherever you are at this morning, afternoon, evening. And with that, I'm just going to introduce them really quickly. Topher Wilkins, co-founder of Opportunity Collaboration, Dominic Regester of Salzburg Global Seminar. We're going to kick off the call with Topher today. And if you have specific questions for Topher, he does have to leave a little bit early today. So just to, as a caveat, to put that in there. And then we'll also be hearing from Dominic. So just be sure to write down and pop in any questions or even things to add, comments, etc. We want this to be a highly participatory call and not just sort of a presentation at people. So with that, I believe we can just hand the mic over to Topher. And thank you both so much for your time today. If we don't use all the time, that's fine as well. But I really appreciate you both taking the time to sit down and just share with the community.
Of course. Thanks, Sarah. So I know almost everyone on this call already, except for Sam. So what's up, Sam? It's nice to meet you. I'm a big fan of Net Impact. And so Sarah, what would be the most valuable sharing at this point? Sort of what happened at OC? And
I think especially because OC came back to being in person, sort of talking about what was it like to have it be virtual and that transition to a hybrid model, because we have OC 365, we have OC in person, and it was at a new venue as well. So I think really sharing the details behind that. We don't need to go into the hurricane that we luckily all missed, but you know, just anything that you think would help folks in this transition from going virtual to hybrid / in person.
Okay,
would
cool.
be super helpful. I'm just gonna get some water, but go for it.
Okay, awesome. And it's probably worth mentioning the hurricane too, because there's as we come back to in-person events, the world is throwing a lot of chaos our way as conveners. And we have to be ready to adopt and pivot and stretch and scramble in response to these types of crises. So I'm happy to speak to that too and what we did. Okay, pivot from virtual to in-person. So as Sarah mentioned, OC launched what we call OC 365. This is a virtual program, series of touch points. We launched it last year, so January of 2021. And this is, of course, in response to the pandemic. We've never done anything like this before. We've had a smattering of virtual calls for OC in the past, but never anything like a regular series of touch points for the community. So in 2021, that was a 9-month program with 3 hours of Zoom and other platform connectivity for the OC community, second Wednesday of every month, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Pacific, as a way to try our best to capture as many time zones as possible. We had about 250 people sign up for that online program as a standalone offering in 2021. I don't know, somewhere about 80 or 90 people out of that 250 would show up to each of those monthly calls. And we did our best to ensure that those virtual touch points were some manifestation of OC's unconference approach. In essence, that meant veering away from Zoom webinar, and ironically, exactly what we're doing right now, which is, one person speaking to the rest. So in essence, a lot of breakout rooms, a lot of deep conversation and connectivity. We experimented with other ways to gather beyond the Zoom sort of hegemony. And there was a sprinkling of play in there. We do little fun games here and there. People could talk about their pets. We found little fun websites to visit to sort of get people outside of the typical online interaction. And it was an incredibly diverse group of folks from all over the globe, which is also part of OC's model. So these were folks from 6 out of 7 continents participating, and a very broad range of stakeholders in the impact ecosystem, nonprofit and for-profit entrepreneurs and funders of different ilks and people from academia, et cetera. So that initial launch of our virtual program was, largely successful. It brought a little bit of revenue, which didn't hurt because our entire business model is based on the in-person event up until that point. So in this year, with the commitment to host the return of the in-person event, of course, we saw the opportunity to, quote, hybridize OC's convening model, which essentially meant making sure that we kept the virtual monthly touch points January through September this year. We also kept those as a standalone offering. So anyone who wanted to opt into just the monthly virtual touch points could. And for everyone who is committing to being at the triumphant return of our in-person gathering, they were also invited into those monthly calls. So the true hybridization occurred when everyone who is otherwise planning on being at the in-person event could connect with a bunch of people who were also going to be at the in-person event well in advance on a regular cadence. And that meant a lot of relationship building, a lot of sharing of ideas and resources and best practices and deep dive conversations in the lead up to the big in-person event. Now, we are still discerning what that meant overall in the sense of like, how successful was that? And did it actually help in the sense that, like, did folks show up to the in-person event sort of on the 50-yard line already? Like, in other words, was that trust built? What were the cultural and community norms already in place? Did it seem like there was sort of enough stickiness in the community before people got there, such that when they got there, they could sort of accelerate and amplify a lot of the good work that they're all doing far more effectively than they would without the monthly touch points? We sent in a survey about 6 days ago. We're still collecting results along those lines. So we'll have more to share. I'll have more to share with anyone who's interested in learning more about that, probably in a month or so. But from my own personal takeaway or personal perspective, it's OC's model going forward. Like, there's no denying that getting folks engaged well in advance of the in-person event is going to be what we offer going forward. In other words, the virtual touchpoints will remain a standalone offering for anyone who can't be at the in-person event, and everyone who comes to the in-person event will be invited to those monthly touchpoints going forward. Yeah, and then there's the hurricane, which I need to talk about because it almost obliterated the in-person event 5 days before the thing was supposed to happen, after 3 years of waiting for this freaking thing to happen again. And yeah, this is obviously a whole nother subject, but there was a 24-hour time period where we basically weren't sure what was the status of the venue, how impacted it was by the hurricane. This is Hurricane Fiona. For anyone who's tracking, it basically wiped out a lot of Puerto Rico and then went up the north coast of the Dominican Republic, and literally the eye of the storm like passed over our venue on its way up the coast. So there was the logistics around, could we in fact host the event at the venue? Was there sufficient power and clean water and food, and were the rooms habitable? And then there were all the moral implications, ethical ramifications of hosting an event, which meant 550 people descending into this post-disaster zone 5-6 days after a major hurricane came through, i.e. were we going to detract resources, suck away valuable food and water and energy from the local community? Or was our presence in fact valuable and beneficial, and was there good reason to be there. So in the 3 or 4 days in the lead up to the event, after we had heard that the venue was sound, the structures were sound, and in fact they were open for business again, and we could host the event. A lot of the scramble in the few days leading up was around like how are we linking our global community of change makers up with local relief efforts on the ground to ensure that we were in fact an additive presence. We quickly lifted up a donation portal to help with funneling money to existing on the ground relief efforts. We had several folks in the OC community volunteer to donate clean water filters for the local community, safe birthing kits for the local community. We also linked up with the folks at HIP, it's Hispanics in Philanthropy. It's a group of Latinx philanthropists, and they had similarly lifted up a donation portal that would match up to $50,000 of relief funds, not only for this portion of the DR, but for the entire Caribbean that was affected by Fiona. We were originally planning on inviting our delegate community to attend an offsite experience in the during OC itself that would provide folks in our community the chance to link up with local leaders. We were going to host that at this like bioregenerative farm that's been in this local family for generations. That farm was heavily impacted by the hurricane. So instead of taking us off site, and there were some clear, very clear conversations around could we indeed be helpful with like shovels and bricks and moving supplies around, or would we essentially show up as a bunch of folks in our flip-flops, like not really helping? So we inevitably made the, I think, wise decision to invite the local leaders who were otherwise going to host us on this farm to Club Med itself. We treated them to a full day of rest and relaxation at the resort. And then they hosted lunch where our delegate community could link up with them. We also had the local mayor of the town speak at our opening remarks. Another local leader who was very active on the ground relief efforts spoke at our opening remarks. So there's essentially very clear linkages between the OC community and the folks doing work on the ground in response to the hurricane. And then last but not least, we ended up donating a bunch of our leftover meeting supplies like Post-it notes and pens and tons of paper and a brand new printer and other supplies that would be valuable for a local school that was heavily impacted by the hurricane. So anyway, I think obviously we pulled it off from a logistical standpoint, and people were safe and everyone had a great time. And I think, with a 3 or 4 day window to respond, we did our best to make sure that that we were in fact welcome to this community, and our presence was ultimately additive. So I know that's not really the focus of the conversation, but it happened and it was a big deal. So I figured I'd share that as peers with you all. Yeah, Sarah, Con, anything I glossed over that you would want me to highlight?
I just would love to see if Thad or Sam have any questions that are sparked from that, or additional questions about the whole moving of a conference from virtual to a more hybrid experience, both virtual and in person, before I ask any questions myself.
I didn't do the virtual, but I could see how it would be definitely additive benefit. I am curious how this OC was compared to the last OC in person, if there were any changes other than the venue.
Yeah, great. So yeah, there were a number of changes this year at that. New venue is part of it, and there's a great story behind why we chose this new venue, which I can share if anyone's interested. One very clear change that we made this year is that it's normally 4 full days. For the in-person event, it was 3 full days this year, so we truncated it by a day. So instead of folks arriving Sunday and leaving Friday, this time around they arrived on Sunday and left on Thursday. And part of the thinking there was we have heard feedback over the years that by the 4th full day, a lot of folks are like, this is great, and I got shit to do, back to work. The reality is knocking type of sentiment. Frankly, given the fact that OC's business model has been so disrupted over the last couple of years, there was a way to save a little bit of money and not be up against a much higher bill than we normally would for a 5th full night of reserving an entire Club Med. And then the final one was that as it relates to hybrid and the virtual touch points, we knew that people had the ability to spend a lot of time together, albeit in 2 dimensions on these screens, in the lead up to the in-person event. In other words, it's my mother-in-law waving at me through the window. In other words, could we make the case that people had basically the same amount of connectivity and conversation, albeit in this hybrid model? So that was one major change, and that's again part of our feedback, is trying to discern how that felt, and did that work, and was that hypothesis proven out? We also tinkered with our agenda and sort of flow of sessions, and we took some historic sessions away. We added some new type of session gatherings, and this was actually with a lot of the help from conveners.org. We went through a global redesign process earlier this year, recognizing that this is sort of an opportunity to refresh OC's model a little bit, breathe some new life into it, and experiment. We kept the whole unconference sort of kept the core of the unconference approach the same. We did a bunch of tinkering around the edges, so to speak. But in essence, it was a slight refresh of the actual flow of agenda sessions too, which I think was relatively successful. What else, Sarah? Do you think I missed anything in terms of like what changed?
No, I think those are like the major changes. There were some things in like the agenda and stuff, but yeah. Mhm. Sam, anything that sparked from you? I know that you're looking at different ways in which to sort of innovate, evolve always, as we all are as conveners, for net impact.
Yeah, one of the things I'm wondering about is like, what was the difference in what people wanted to do while they were there? I know like you tinkered with the agenda and things like that, but were people attending the same kinds of sessions and number of sessions before, or were they mostly focused on connecting with each other? Were there certain kinds of content with a whole lot of quotes around it that people gravitated to that felt different than the last time things were in person? Anything like that?
Yeah, good question, Sam. Well, in some ways, for OC, connection and content aren't mutually exclusive, which is just, it's in a lot of events those are mutually exclusive. So, like our model, Sam, is all about facilitating deep dialogue and human connectivity within the agenda itself. So I think a lot of people came to OC expecting that, and got the like 5-course Michelin star buff meal along those lines. Like they got it in spades. So to put a finer point on that, like we have what we call colloquium, where we designate small groups of people and attach those groups to a moderator, and those groups meet consistently over the course of the event. We actually expanded on that a little bit this year. We call this something else called leadership circles, but it's the sort of direct approach at making sure that everyone connects with like a small, intimate peer group throughout the course of the event. And that is by far and away like a lot of folks' favorite aspect of how we convene, and it was something that we really amplified this year because we recognize that that's exactly what people wanted. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like where there was some sort of differentiation between and then maybe just another finer point on it, like a lot of our sessions outside of those leadership circles, or those intimate groups, are delegate-led dialogues and discussions, like literally a circle of chairs where everyone's supposed to be engaging in a conversation and rolling up their sleeves and actively participating. And being both a learner and contributor. The folks hosting those sessions are expected to ask a lot of questions and facilitate a dialogue as opposed to like speechify or present a PowerPoint or something. So inevitably, you get to connect with a bunch of peers, even in what is otherwise the structured agenda for OC. And we also bake in a lot of like open space and other ways for people to interact with each other outside of those formal agenda sessions. For example, we have a program called Affinity Circles where by and large, OC is all about like breaking down silos and making sure that we bring together this really diverse but mission aligned cross sector of human beings focused on social impact. And we believe there's a lot of power in making sure that like the most unlikely allies have a chance to link up and you get to interact with folks you would never normally be speaking to. However, we also obviously recognize the power of easily finding your most aligned peers within the context of this community. So affinity circles are an attempt to make sure that everyone working in education, for example, could easily find each other, or everyone working in North America as a geography or sub-Saharan Africa could easily find each other, or everyone who considers themselves an impact investor could easily find each other. So with a slight tweak from previous years, affinity circles this year met in the context of doing fun activities together. So we take this all-inclusive resort. There's like trapeze and mini golf and like giant stand-up paddle boarding and tennis and pickleball and ping pong and all these bocce ball and et cetera. So all these fun things that people can do while they're there. So some of the affinity circles took advantage of that. I think all of them did. In fact, organized like all the folks working in health, we're going to go take a long walk down the beach today, or everyone who's considers a grant maker is invited to a pickleball tournament. So it's, again, it's OC's entire approach here is to focus on connectivity, and the content is a means to an end. The official sessions on the agenda is exactly that. It's a way to ensure more people are actively talking to each other and connecting with each other.
Topher, were more people, are you finding that more funders are doing office hours instead of one-on-one meetings, which are
Yeah, totally thing. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, those are very popular.
And they typically do like two.
Yeah,
one
a
or
lot
two?
of, yeah, so we had two, Sam, just so you, and Dominic, just so you know what I'm talking about here. There's always this typical dynamic when you bring together fund seekers and resource providers at OC, which is, frankly, to put in blunt terms, like the funders can often feel barraged with individual meeting requests, some of which are relevant, potentially exactly the types of folks that funders are seeking. Some maybe most are not. So as a way to mitigate, well, and then of course for the fund seeker, it's frustrating because the funder sometimes sometimes responds, sometimes doesn't, and then you're never sure if you should be putting umpteen million physical notes in their mailbox or trying to track them down somewhere else. So as a way to mitigate the stress around that dynamic, we developed what we call funder office hours, where anyone who's a fund provider can set up shop in one specific location at a set time, and anyone who wants to go ask that person questions has a chance to go sit and pepper that person with questions. So as opposed to having to schedule a bunch of one-on-ones, it's a way to sort of attend to that in a group way, in a collective way. So Thad, yeah, we had two set times every day that funders could host office hours, and one consistent location. And in each of those slots, there were probably like 4 or 5 or 6 funders offering office hours at any given time. A lot of the funders would select one of those 2 times each day and then host office hours 3 times throughout the course of the 3 days. And those were pretty popular. Obviously, there's usually like 20 or 30 people clustered around each of those funders for those office hours.
Oh, Ron's here.
Hey, Ron.
Welcome, Ron. Hey,
Sorry.
Miles.
Asking.
Multitasking.
Hi,
Sorry.
Miles.
The meeting went long. Sorry, I'm late.
No worries. Well, since you both are here, would you mind doing a really quick introduction since we're a small group and we were all just at OC together and Topher's talking about OC and the whole purpose is to have this be participatory and share behind the curtain. As participants, I think it'd be really valuable to get your quick perspective of how did it go for you?
Okay, you want to talk first about because Topher, you were just talking about the office hours, so.
Yeah.
I know we just jumped in the middle of your comment, but you want to say something first about the fellows and how the participation has evolved, or if that would be useful to your conversation.
Yeah, what would be most useful, Topher, to give feedback on, or any of you?
Or
Yeah,
introduction
thanks, Miles.
on it,
I mean,
whatever.
the initial premise of this, and by the way, Ron, Miles, you know Thad yet? She's been at OC before.
Yeah, I think we've met.
I
Yeah,
don't know that
cool.
I've.
yeah, so, yeah, okay.
You're responsible for getting an RA5 to the OC.
I think so,
Oh,
yeah.
really?
I remember that, yeah.
Cool. I'm happy
Yeah.
about that.
Way back in Ixtapa, right then?
So, yeah, through our
Yeah.
trustee, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Ron and Miles, Dominic is my other speaker today. He's at
Yep, hi,
Salzburg
Dominic.
Global.
Great.
And
I'm
then
trying
Sam.
not to have you have the light behind you. Sorry about that.
And then Sam is with Net Impact. So and then the premise of today, the big burning question was, what does it look like for events to come back in person now, especially events that are looking at like a hybrid approach between online and in real life or in-person gathering. So I was mainly talking about like the addition of OC 365 this year and those monthly touch points and what that means for the in-person event.
Yeah.
And then a couple other questions came up. So anyway.
So
that
maybe
was
I
the
can get a little
major-
context and then come back to that.
Yeah.
So I've been a long-term, probably now 35 years, an advocate of the virtual, going back to when my father started a distance learning organization in the 80s. That was last century, guys. But the effect on the organizations that participated in that and the students that took the master's degree programming with technologies that were far less capable than now, just convinced me that there's a lot in virtual. And then we did a lot of work in around 2008, 2012 in an organization called RISE, which was trying to get virtual global collaborations going around solving the wicked problems by bringing people together from all over the world that had the appropriate backgrounds, expertises to participate in creating solutions. So I've been a long-term advocate of that, of the virtual, but in the context of mixed with physical, because there is even though we proved, I think, very well in the 4 or 5 years I was involved with RISE in around 2010, that you could build the trust without ever meeting, and you could actually trust each other enough, even though you had differing objectives for your organizations, that I'm a big believer in the hybrid, I guess. Another data point to introduce is I've been working for probably 10 years now with World Merit, and it is a global community of young change makers, young adult change makers, and doing a lot of technology work. In fact, that's why I was late. I was talking to WeChangers and Duarte, and I know Sarah, you talked to him just recently about integrating, bringing the combined power of what we've built to be able to connect the community, to inspire, to provide news capabilities, to start actions and to join actions, is what the We World Merit part brings. And many of you are familiar with the WeChangers, the resources, the communications, the collaboration groups, all of that. So we're talking about bringing that together and then making it very available to organizations that are probably well represented in the conveners group. So, and I'll just mention Sam did a lot of work with with net impact back probably 2007, 2008, and bringing YPO and then net impact together. But I think that sort of may have faded. I haven't kept up with it. So where do you want to go from there, Topher?
Yeah, good question, Ron. Man, we have a lot to talk about, by the way. Yeah, I'm excited to reconnect. Well, I suppose in the context of coming back together in real life, like in person, one huge aspect of what Ron and Marlis bring to the OC community all is the Bo Media Fellows. And I've only seen through social media posts at this point some of their experiences, but Ron and Marlis, if you have anything to share around the feedback you're getting from the Bo Media Fellows around what it meant to be back together in person and with this community, I'd love to hear that myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna back up just a second and say, I've got a whole lot of other kinds of feedback I'd love to give at some point that's more specific, and it will be one of the things is around the venue, which I loved, by the way, and I thought it worked really well for a lot of reasons, and a few not. So almost all my feedback is going to be in the kind of pro and con thought process, that I'd like to give you some more specifics. And for us at OC, we actually wear so many different hats. I have a hard time only looking at one thing. So we wear a funder hat in both the grant making, not so much. That's more capacity building. We wear an impact investing. That has gotten a lot less over the years in terms of people being able to find those people at OC, but that isn't the topic of this conversation. So our fellows, it was a challenge this year, and it was we started in January under the assumption that it was going to look more similar to what it had been in years past, and that wasn't how it played out. So we had to do a lot of scrambling towards the end. We had very competent people, so that wasn't, we were able to do that, but we really have to rethink some of that. So I think the general question that I would like to put out there is not so much around, I'm a big believer that in-person touch points and online touch points can work, and that you can do trust building, you can do relationship building, you can do project management, you can get things done, you can introduce people, you can do all sorts of things in both of those ways. I think what we're not able to do as well with the broad base of OC delegates that come is what's in it for each of the different kinds of constituents. And that plays out in for the people who are so desperately looking for something, which is, overwhelmingly they're looking for money versus networks versus they're looking for some way of moving forward. And relationship building without thinking of that as a purpose of how do you help them move along. That was really why we moved the media fellows into offering what we offer, is because what they said they needed and what they actually needed were two different things. So we built it up over the years into being able to address, really the whole effort was trying to help them get more clarity and consistency in non-jargony, concise messaging, both internally and externally, and then who are they targeting, and understanding why they're targeting those people, and then understanding how to meet them more efficiently where they are. And it isn't always social media, but they come in thinking, I need social media. It used to be when we started, they came in thinking, I need to have a documentary done about me because then the money's going to flow, or I need a big book or an article published about me. And now it's, they need social media, which really isn't what they need. They need to understand who's going to be interested in them and willing to fund them, and who's going to be the influencers, and who's, so in that sense, it was a really hard year for us. There was so much going on that people didn't have the time to go there. So we had declining numbers. And for our fellows, they definitely felt like they had something to offer, but they didn't feel as utilized as they have in years past. just because of trying to condense so much into the time. And I think the other piece of that was we used to be able to reach out to the Cordis Fellows as a group, and they were always a significant part of who we, who came to ours. And having all the different fellows, a lot of the fellows in affinity groups were meeting at the same time as our workshops were happening. So it was not ideal for that particular group. And if you want to hear any, my future feedback, that was the question you asked me. So I think the people who came got great value out of it. And obviously all of the fellows we've had, which is probably over 50 at this point over the years, are very knowledgeable about social impact work. And that's a really key difference in what they offer compared to the market in general. You don't want just a regular commercial brand person working with a social impact company. So it's they're definitely great people to be able to hire for anybody who's got the resources to be able to do that. They're not going to be great people to try to ask for pro bono work. So we subsidize it there, so it's free for people, but they need to make a living, and journalism is a broken model, and most of these people come out of a journalism area, so they need to charge for their time. They're not subsidized to come. So that's my band, my little rant. Didn't mean to go off in quite that much of a detail, but I
no, it's interesting though. It's interesting in the context of this conversation, in the sense of like, yeah, I mean, we're all so hungry to be back together in person. So how do we as event organizers hold the tension of content versus connection? That was actually one of the questions that came up right before you got here. Like, I have to assume that less sessions are going to be attended than normal in most conferences, only because everyone's going to be talking to each other in the hallway more than they normally
Was that the
would.
case? It wasn't for me as much because I was running to the next all the time. So
and I also think that was always historically where the magic actually happened with OC.
Yeah,
and I didn't have the time to do it at all this time. And that's what I heard overwhelmingly from the people who'd been there in years past, not from the new people. But I did hear some disappointment from some of the new people about they weren't able to reach the kind of support they were hoping to get. Again, it's around finding money.
But that, it seemed like in previous years, they were better prepared to start relationships with funders than they were. I don't think they came in with a lot more expectations of, I'm going to close a deal here. And I believe in past years, and this is where I think the bookending of virtual with in person to build the connection and the relationship, but then be prepared to come in to talk to funders. Have some idea of what you should expect in terms of time they're going to give you and how far you're going to get in the meeting. Then schedule something, then have potentially office hour connections, Zoom afterwards. Now they know each other, right? So there may be that combination of virtual preparation, in-person relationship building, and then the more transactional things happen virtually one-on-one with a greater time flexibility on both sides.
Do you know how many of the new people actually came to the 360? Because the virtual calls, because there seemed to be an assumption that some of the onboarding would have happened through that, and there was a lot of confusion that used to be handled by more of the ambassadors that you used to have.
Yeah, I don't know if we have the analytics, Marlis, to give you an accurate answer to that.
Yeah.
It's hard to capture attendance on 100 plus person Zoom calls, but
Topher, well, first of all, thank you, Ron and Marlis, for your behind the curtain perspectives and feedback. And we do have another impact convener here that I really want to hear from as well. And I think that everyone will learn a great deal from too.
Can I ask Topher a question before I start?
Yes.
Can I come up with a question?
Yeah.
Because I know you've got to leave on the air. I wondered about that kind of post-pandemic rustiness, and then some of what you're saying about people not quite coming in and behaving in a way that was most impactful in previous years. And whether, yeah, the extent to which you experience that, or whether that you feel, because I mean, we found with stuff here that, you know, just on kind of really elementary things like logistics, travel logistics, that the first couple of programs we did when it was easier to travel into Europe, so kind of spring of this year, you know, a surprising number of people didn't have passports, or their passports had less than 6 months to go on them, so they couldn't get a visa. And it was just all that, yeah, that kind of, I suppose, like life laundry type rustiness. And then also, you know, in terms of how people behaved in a group together was also slightly different at the beginning. And I think in positive and negative ways too.
Interesting.
Yeah, and to Sarah's point in chat, visa and travel issues, Dominic, were definitely an issue this year. Part of that may be the rustiness. Part of that is also, it's more challenging to get in the Dominican Republic than it was for folks to come to Mexico, where we previously hosted OC.
Yeah.
So
Really?
there's an element there's an element of like just it's difficult, and I think people are rusty at the same time. I'm not so sure about the like people's behavior on site related to that. I don't know. That's going to be an
It's
interesting.
more thinking about
piece.
something like Ron was saying about people coming in with kind of slightly mismatched expectations of what was realistic to achieve. Sort of behavior in that sense, rather than wayward or errant behavior or anything else.
Yeah.
Folks, I can't wait to hear Dominic's piece, and I actually I have another thing at the top of the hour that I have to be part of. Any other questions before we shift over to Dom?
Mhm.
Cool. Well, can I jump in?
I see them.
I wasn't sure if any of you would know Salzburg Global Seminar, so I put together a really short 6-slide PowerPoint thing so you could see a bit about where we are and where we work and what we do. So I hope that's okay. It's not, I promise it's not a kind of 3-hour PowerPoint. So I'm from London in the UK originally, but I've been living in Salzburg in Austria for the last 6 years, thereabouts. So we're based, Salzburg Global Seminar is based in this palace that you can see on the screen there. It's called Schloss Leopoldsplan. It was built in the mid-18th century. If you've seen the film The Sound of Music, you may well recognize it, as it's used as the family home in The Sound of Music. There is not a Sound of Music cliche or joke that we haven't heard. And you know, and it's an astonishing place to be able to have as a headquarters, because you know you can create a genuine retreat-like atmosphere here. We know the space intimately, so you can manipulate it and control it. You know, we try to do more and more with creating that sort of liminal sense that when you come into a program, it's a residential program, that you will leave it changed in some way, and that you have to come in with a willingness to be changed by the experience of being here, and with a willingness to leave a significant percentage of your day job at the gate when you come in. So we were on the screen rather than so we were set up 75 years ago. So just after the Second World War, set up by an Austrian and 2 Americans who were at Harvard, who were interested in the idea of taking a very human-centered, and this is language from now, but it's true for the spirit of the enterprise at the beginning, taking a very human-centered design approach to convening. And through that, you could build trust and understanding across groups who weren't previously connected in any way, shape, or form. So they used an analogy. An analogy was used in Christian Science Monitor at the time that it started, about it being like a Marshall Plan for the mind.
Mhm.
So you could bring, this kind of intellectual endeavor, bring together groups. Can you excuse me for 2 seconds? I'm just going to close the door because there's an enormous racket outside. So sorry about that. So bringing together groups who've been on different sides during the Second World War in its first iteration, and then take this very human-centered design approach. You could build connection and trust and understanding, and let them find ways of working together to develop new solutions or new ways of framing the kind of problems that Western Europe and North America were likely to face in the late 40s and 50s. Now, over the intervening 75 years, the portfolio has expanded. It's now globally facing in who we convene and how we convene and the kind of problems that we look to try and address. The core mission has always been, although the wording has evolved slightly, but the core mission has always really been to work with or challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world. We now have 4 priority program areas: peace and justice, arts and culture, health, and education. So I lead the education work. But across all the 4 areas, we have a kind of theory of action or theory of change, which is, if you can bring people together who don't previously know each other and haven't previously worked together, you can start with that bridging divides. Once you've done that, through the kind of very human-centered in-person convening, you can expand the possibilities of collaboration, and that ultimately, that's what will lead to a kind of system transformation. Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, was the chair of the very first program that we ever had here back in 47, and she said after she wrote shortly after the first program, the quote which she's really well known for around the world, which never underestimate the power of a small group of committed citizens to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And so that, that's been a sort of North Star type quote for us ever since. Oops. So what we've started to do, and this is the kind of, I think there were 3 things that I really wanted to share with you. One is ways in which we've started to think post-pandemic about going beyond convening. So what we've done with the education work here is we've established this education centre focused on education transformation, which we brought all of our different education programs under. So a combination of in-person and online network type programs that we started during the pandemic. So thinking about, so all these different programs are on the roof, and we've been able to build a kind of greater sense of unified purpose across what was quite a sort of disparate set of programs. And then we've also started to think about new ways in which we can better support the people who participate in our programs, or the people that we would really like to work with, using the platform that we have to amplify more voices or share great work across different networks. With all of the online and in-person programs, we use this 4I framing, where we always want the programs to be international, inclusive, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational. And we found that to be a useful lens to think about as we're putting groups together, and keeps us on track. Particularly, I think, in the current climate, the idea of intergenerationality and how do we ensure that we've got the right combination of voices. When we do a residential program, and we've used a similar size model for all of the online network programs, then we can have, I think it's up to 65 people stay on site in the palace, but that becomes quite large for some of the bigger, some of the kind of main convening rooms. So we found sort of 45 to 50 to be optimum, although we can go larger when we need to. So what we've done, so in terms of going beyond convening, we've got these, we do the online and the in-person, and then we've also secured some funding to offer writing residencies. So if someone is working on a topic that connects to education transformation, come and stay with us for up to 3 weeks. Use us as a kind of intellectual thought partner. We've got, great staff here. We've also got an amazing network of people who've participated in programs over the last 75 years, an enormous number of whom are still connected with the organization. So we can help with the kind of ideation of new thinking. We're starting a lecture series as a way of sharing and transmitting ideas. We're going to have group development residencies, and we're increasing the publication schedule. These are the kind of education programs that we do. So we sort of wanted to take, we've always been an independent nonprofit, but we also started to feel we could have more of a kind of moral position on certain topics. So we have there are aspects of education transformation that we are very keen to see in systems in the future. So a greater emphasis on whole child development, a greater emphasis on regenerative education, more thinking about the role of education leadership, ways in which power needs to shift within education systems, bringing in more youth voices, working more closely with policymakers as kind of key levers for change in their respective systems. And we've started, we've increased the kind of way in which we try to support people who've participated in our programs through publishing essay collections, through podcasts with different partners, where we can amplify voice and experience. And you know, that kind of idea of how do we use the platform that we have to both create and hold space rather than create and hold power for the people who participate in our different programs. So we're definitely looking at going beyond convening. So that was the first thing, which I thought might be of interest. Second thing was ways in which I think we've been changed by the pandemic in terms of how we convene and who comes together. So one of those is similar to what Topher was saying about how we use online engagement before a program starts. So we found it incredibly useful to get groups together a couple of times before they meet in person, so that they have a chance to get to know some of the other people in the group. We can co-create the program more effectively that way. So we do kind of key questions that you need to see addressed type sessions in the run up to a program to make sure everyone is able to, when they go back to their home countries and home organizations, they're able to say very clearly, you know, that this was worth their time because the key things they needed to see addressed were picked up through different discussions. We've also found in the past when we go straight into an in-person program that a surprisingly high percentage of participants will talk about imposter syndrome afterwards, and you do that kind of round of introductions on the first day, and half the group feel that they don't have enough experience or seniority or aren't clever enough to be in the group. So we've done a lot more work to address that kind of imposter syndrome and make it really clear that if it's a group of 45 people, everyone is there because they've got something really important to contribute. Nobody is ever coming to just transmit. It's very much a kind of exchange-based approach. And then the aspect, you know, the kind of intergenerational makeup of the programs has become more and more important as well this year. So thinking about, at the moment, we're still working on a kind of percentage system. So we want to have at least 15% of participants as under 30. And it's great when you get, you know, the last program that I got to do here, we had an age range of 21 to 76, I think, which is great for, you know, opening up all sorts of different kinds of insights. And then the very last thing, which is still, is kind of more anecdotal, but is interesting, I think, is that certainly across the education programs so far this year, and it seems to be the case across health and culture programs, there is much more interest from participants in doing the kind of inner work at the beginning of a program, and that you've got to be willing to undergo that personal transformation if you're to have any kind of legitimacy to talk about system transformation. And that, you know, when it's a 4.5 day program, which is what most of them are, that, you know, there's a kind of sense of urgency and pace, and we've got to get through everything. And what we found this year is that people who come in to the space want to press pause more frequently during the program and just take time for reflection and think about how they're changing or what they're learning through being part of it, which I think is a really positive evolution, but something that wasn't nearly as visible pre-pandemic. As a slightly scattergun run through different things, but hopefully of interest. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
That's what a great program.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of things to share with you about. My father started something back in that time. Actually, I was born in Vienna.
Oh, really?
Working in on what became also a global effort very, very different, but I'd love to share that with you sometime. So
Yeah, please,
A
welcome.
lot of the insights and principles that you're sharing are things that we've seen as patterns evolving as well. So I think there's a lot of compatibility in our thinking.
yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
Dominic, I would love, you did mention imposter syndrome, which I think is something that, and the power dynamics, right? The skewed power dynamics, especially when you said you're bringing in 21-year-olds and 78-year-olds, right? And so there's a lot of different work experience and titles and levels within organizations that are represented. And you mentioned you had done a little bit of work around preparing or helping to balance out those power dynamics. And I just would love to hear a little bit about that if you can share.
Yeah, so I mean, we're very clear that if you're here, it's because you've got something to contribute. So it's a very flat hierarchy. And it doesn't matter if you're a 21-year-old running a tiny NGO on the West Bank in Palestine, or you're the Minister of Education in country X. If you're part of the program, and it's because we believe sincerely that you've got something which others can learn from. Everyone has to come in with a willingness to share and learn. And when people don't behave like that, they never have as positive an experience as them. I mean, you always get some people who, because of ego or work pressure or whatever, you know, they come in for the sessions that they're speaking in, not part of the panel, and then they disappear back to their room for the rest of it. And almost without exception, they say they regret it at the end, because it is also about, you know, building community. We're trying to make sure that everyone knows that from the get-go. So we do, you know, we put a lot of time into the opening introduction session to make sure that every voice is heard in the first session, so that everybody gets to speak. And then in terms of a kind of narrative arc, the shape of a 4.5-day program, the first 2 days were typically about trying to curate the right session so that as many people as possible get to speak and get to share the insights that they have in their context, and making sure that we're always mixing up. If it's a panel, that you've got a balance of young people and more senior, more established leaders in the group, that you've got obviously the gender and geographic balance as well. And then when we get into the second half of the program, which is more about the kind of delineation of specific pain points, or what are the things that this group feels they have an expertise and a legitimacy to try and address within this wider problem. So if we were doing a problem about you know, inclusive education, a program about inclusive education, how can we break down different barriers that people face dealing with inclusive education in their respective countries, and then where do we have legitimacy and expertise to try and move the needle on those topics? And that kind of smaller working group model is also, it creates the right space for everyone to be able to contribute, I think. You're muted, Ron, if you're sorry.
That's right. Yeah, I really like what you're doing, and the 75 years is fantastic. You know, that you've been doing this, and the learnings and perspectives you've had, and especially as you've seen. I'd love to see what has been changed over the decades in terms of how people are approaching things.
Yeah, that would be a good read. We have a good university partner here in Salzburg, so to think about a kind of piece of archive research. Do you come back over to Vienna much?
Occasionally. We tend to be going to Africa or Asia, South America, Dominican Republic. So, but yeah, it's love to find out more about what you're doing. And
well, I've put my email address.
Yeah, I already copied it and put it into a contact, and I'll send you I misspelled.
Yeah, really
I gotta fix that first. So
I'd be very happy to speak. And yeah, if you work brings you back this way, then come and stay. There are worse places to have to stay for a couple of days.
I remember actually looking at the house from the other side of the river when we were there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And one of our daughters had, I think, somebody that interned with you. She was able to actually be in that house. Her name was Chantel Bell. It was some years ago. She was working in policy things. Well, she was in college at the time, but interested in policy kinds of things. And I can't remember what the subject was. I just remember she was there.
We have a good number of impact fellow we used to call them interns, and now they're impact fellows, who
Yeah.
come in from different universities and work with us for sort of 3 to 6 months. So that's great. So you knew us already,
Oh, yeah.
or knew of us.
Well, knew of you, not as thorough as what I heard today. Happy to get that. It just, our son would have loved to have been on this call to hear that as well. He's very in line with a lot of the thinking that you're presenting there, so we'll have to expose him to the youth.
Yeah, well, feel free to pass my email address on. I'd be very happy to speak with him.
Yeah.
And Dominic, you mentioned for your fellows, they're mostly university students that attend,
No,
or
in terms of the kind of impact fellows, but in terms of participants, then it's broadly speaking, it's a sort of mix of policy, research, and practice. So people who are, so with the education programs, we will always have academics who are researching the topic. We will try to have people in ministries of education who are dealing with the kind of implementation, and then people who are actually trying to change culture in their respective systems. So whether that's NGOs or teachers or school leaders. We do a lot of work with different UN agencies and World Bank and other big NGOs. Yeah, that mixture of policy, research, and practice, and trying to connect the gaps or close the gaps that can exist between them.
So if a university is trying to create knowledge, perspective, skills that will be applied within hopefully 15 or 20 years of their participating in the university, what kind of outcomes in perspective shifts or different actions or different relationships do you expect? What's the time frame that you're looking for, and what are the outcomes that you'd like to see after participation?
It's a great question, because it's like anyone who does convening, it's very hard to isolate impact, and also you kind of run the risk of hubris if you try and overclaim quite quickly. So what we've started to do recently, and I will answer the question, I promise, but what we started to do recently is kind of look back through the archives of what were the topics that we were convening on in the 1970s or the 1980s, and then how prescient were those, were they the right things, because it led to, not that it led to, but it hopefully contributed to changes in society. So we had some really interesting programs on university connections behind the Iron Curtain in the sort of early 70s, mid 70s. We did a lot of work with civil society organizations in Eastern Europe. Again, sort of in the late 70s and early 80s, we did some interesting health programs on AIDS and HIV in the very early 80s, before it was a kind of much bigger concern. So you hope to be able to get a sense that we're convening on the right topics, but you can only know that fully retrospectively. In terms of timescale, it's it varies massively. We've had I did a program it was a 2-part program in November 2018 and November 2019 with a group called Ending Pandemics, which is a Jeff Skoll funded initiative, and we were looking specifically at timeliness metrics. So there was a feeling within the pandemic community that it took an unnecessarily long time from first case diagnosis to WHO actually being able to mobilize and categorize the pandemic. And the timeliness metrics that came out of the program were picked up by the WHO within about 3 months of the program, which was unusually fast. So
This
you can
was
get
before COVID.
Well,
yeah, this was before COVID.
Is that somewhere that we can access?
Yeah, that's what I can send you, or I can send Sarah.
Yeah, we'd be interested. We're working with a number of healthcare related kinds of things where that's an appropriate.
They're based in San Francisco. They're absolutely phenomenal organization. So we did that on human health in the first year, and then in 2019 it was on a kind of One Health approach, so looking at better connections between zoonotic, environmental and human health. So we had a kind of different group of sort of veterinarians, doctors, epidemiologists, so on and so forth. And it was a different, the outcome for that, we published it, or it was ready for publication in March 2020. and most of the world's pandemic experts were otherwise engaged at that point. So, but it's referenced in a couple of academic papers recently, which was interesting. And we worked with, with CDC and WHO and others on that. But I can send you the timeliness framework and the articles about it.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So, yeah, was there any, before we came on, I apologize for being late, was there any direction that came out of this in terms of some ahas that would be adoptable? Was there any discussion about the virtual versus in line, or the hybriding of that?
To the extent that I think it's a feature of all conveners' conversations, because it's kind of top of mind.
So what would help advance the discussion or the understanding most?
And at the same time, can I ask one more add-on question? What have you found the most challenging?
Is that for me or for Sarah? Or
Any
Colin,
of
or all
you,
of us?
anybody that does these kinds of convenings, all of you.
I think it might not be the most challenging, but the thing we probably missed the most was the opportunity for serendipity. With the the online convenings are so much more precision engineered that you've got people for 90 minutes, and you're much more in a kind of attention economy environment, because it's so easy to go back to your inbox or change screen, and so there's much less space for just free thought. And we know that if you can get a really great group of people together, and then often the most interesting outcomes are the ones that come over a beer in the evening, or because people were sat next to each other at lunch, which is one of the great virtues of a residential program model. And we definitely lost almost all of that in the 2 years of the pandemic. So you could still, we can get groups working together and they commit to meeting every month for 90 minutes a month, and you lose a few along the way, but most people will stay true to that, and you can get some of the same outcomes, but there was definitely less spontaneity. But the kind of the good thing, I think, from a sort of geeky convening point of view, is that post-pandemic, people are now so much more at ease turning up on Zoom and meeting strangers on Zoom, whatever the platform is, that we can do. We have a group of 50 people coming in December. They will meet 3 times online in November. They can, contribute to co-creating the program. People turn up in new ways, I think, in those spaces. People know, it's important to have your camera on, to be as present as you can for the time, all this kind of stuff. So I think, the hybrid model, I absolutely agree with what Topher is saying. The hybrid model is definitely, as an industry, we're probably changed for the better by the experience of the pandemic, because you can convene with purpose in new ways and build that sense of shared purpose before your actual in-person event. And then, the other thing, it's not just about prep, it's also about post-event, the way you can continue to keep a group working together and supporting each other and amplifying one another's initiatives.
Yeah, Sarah, go ahead, and then I have a comment on that. So.
Yeah, I was just going to speak in terms of OC365, since conveners.org helped design and run that initiative. And I think that's what we saw exactly, Dominic, is we really tried a lot of different innovative ways in which to reconnect folks during COVID, because we physically couldn't get together. But also what we saw, I think, with OC as well, is there were people who physically couldn't make it to the event. And I know you mentioned that as well in your presentation, but I think it does create more access and equity in terms of being able to meet others without having to actually physically travel, especially because I know OC, for example, is quite expensive for a lot of folks to actually be able to financially afford to go to that. But OC365 was at a steeply discounted price compared to the in-person conference, and it allowed people who weren't able to go to the physical conference to still participate, meet speakers that would be at OC, and connect with other delegates that were participating there. And so I think, too, to your point, people are more used to it, but I think also we need to shake things up in terms of, you know, we use a lot of different platforms and tools and icebreakers and engagement and structuring the Zoom calls so that we'd have breakout rooms or serendipity connections where it's just like randomly pairing people or putting people in small groups with a question to help them share more personal sides to themselves and not have it be so focused on the professional side. That is a little bit more of the OC sort of way in which we do things. But I do think, to your point, there's a lot to be said with connecting people virtually, even if it's leading up to the physical event and not offering both necessarily or live streaming at the in-person event. And it's something that I wish more convenings would do so that people don't feel, I feel like there's always this anxiety around connecting in person of like, oh, I have all the like 50 people I need to meet, you know, and go to sessions and, you know, eat and try and work while I'm at this event. And it just creates sort of a little bit of anxiety. And I think if you add COVID and being around a lot of people, like I'm going to SoCap next week, there's going to be over 2,000 people in one space.
Mhm.
That to me is a little anxiety producing after not being around people for so long. So even with masks and everything else, and even at OC, like the happy hours I skipped because I was like, you guys are too happy for me tonight, you know. It's like there's still COVID. I have a toddler at home. So, you know, thinking about ways to engage all types of people, including introverts, etc., I think is really important to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, the access, one of the principles in when we worked in RISE in 2008, 2012, was that to get good solutions vetted by different stakeholders in the discussion, during the discussion, as opposed to after it's been created and people say, well, we're not participating because of this, right? We said, look, for the cost of an annual cost would be equivalent to one flight and one night's hotel stay, right? And you can now spend unlimited time working in the groups, which were generally monthly. But the idea was that organizations just won't let people go. You know, if you're representing, you know, this group and, oh, you want me to fly for and then 3 days and I'm gone for a week and you want to pay that, have that cost? There's no way. So we wanted to make sure we brought the right people into the room. So that was the virtual is one thing. Another comment, unrelated, is that I have seen a lot of experimentation online that I think very few people are aware of that because very few people have a lot of experience. I mean, we were literally using asynchronous text, senior executives on 4 continents working together on a team where they read each other's material, right? And they commented on in threaded conversation, they commented on different parts and then people could comment on their comments. And the seminar approach, which is you know, small group working together over time, is much different than the webinar approach where we'll present this to everybody, because that has the same limitations as the classroom lecture. And in that if there is any interaction, it's the fast talkers, the people that speak before they think, which is not bad. I do that. I think as I speak. But the people that think first and then bring a lot to the table often don't even have time to be brought up. So which in an asynchronous text model completely is reversed, right? Not reversed, but you know, everybody's equal, I guess.
So more inclusive.
Very inclusive in that way. So there's a lot of learning modalities that can be challenged that make sense. And one of the big concerns I have is what I've seen in YPO. So YPO went virtual. Do you know what YPO is? The Young Presidents Organization, 30,000+ CEOs from 80, 90 countries around the world. And it's an education and idea exchange to make better leaders, is what the mission is. So their modality is a local meetings where each education chair for a year brings in different resources to have experiences or talks or whatever. Well, when they went to COVID, they said, well, we're going to be sharing this. We can either go dormant for 2 years or however long it's going to take, or we can actually do something. So they went virtual, and they started broadcasting resuming the conversations. And so now they said, oh, it's no extra cost, because the main cost is the cost of the food and the venue when you get together. Why don't we invite other chapters to participate as well? So there was a incredibly rich, super high level resources that they could now afford, because they weren't paying for the food, and they were sharing it across thousands of people. And we had 600 people or 2,000 people listening, where normally it would be 30 or 70 or something like that. And they've gone back to the old model because they never really got deep enough into the other model. And I think it's for a tremendous shame. So I'm really concerned about people that had doubts about virtual, just knee-jerk backing to what we did before.
It's a different world now.
One of the wonderful opportunities that particular experience offered was what I'm sure you found out in the diversity group. When you got to the question and answer part of it, the perspectives that you brought in from different parts of the world is so valuable in terms of learning.
Yeah. The rise actually came from the experience that an international chair of YPO had, traveling around and meeting people all over the world who he found had the same concerns, but very different perspectives based on their governmental system or their religions or cultures as to how they were thinking about the particular problem. Same problems, different approaches. And he said, let's bring these people together. And he said, well, how do we bring the people together if they can't travel or don't have enough time? Because it needed a repetitive gathering, which built both trust and progress, right? So we did a lot of work with neuroscientists and consciousness people, all that, to how do you build trust quickly? How do you maintain and increase vulnerability, which builds trust? How do you, get over the, well, I'm a fisherman and you're a scientist and you're telling me I can't fish issue, and that just didn't happen because there was trust building, and because the facilitators were very well trained to deal with people issues, process issues, purpose and progress, right? So they were all trained in lots of different categories in that way, which made it actually very difficult to be a very good facilitator, but it was a very rich training that has evolved over the years. We could not get foundations or groups like the Salzburg Global Conference to become the funders or the people that would initiate a collaboration happening, which again was much cheaper than putting it together online or in person. But we couldn't get people to understand the benefit of bringing those stakeholders together for a year, where there was work done in session and out of session to make progress on particular specific problems. So it now has pivoted to become a culture connection group across global enterprises. So.
Thanks,
One of the subjects that I'd like to hear a discussion on at some point in time with people like all of you on the phone is our perspective of the whole concept of collaboration. Is people really want to collaborate as long as they bring people in to do what they're working on, collaborate with what I am working on, versus collaborating on somebody else's project. So the brilliant ideas and best practices that are out there for how to break that down and have people be open-minded enough to be willing to pursue that differently.
Yeah. It's such a
From a leader point of view as well as the follower. I don't think the issue is with the follower point of view. It's the leader point of view.
it's
Yeah.
a real different. Sorry, go ahead. So.
No, we're over time, so I want to just,
Sorry.
no, that's fine. This is a great discussion.
Obviously engaged.
I just wanted to thank Dominic for his time and just in honor, acknowledge that we are over time, And just, yeah, you guys have exchanged email addresses. I hope you're able to connect after this call. I'm connecting with both of you, Ron Marles, after this